So, can you go ahead and tell us your name and basically what you do here at the Abraham Baldwin Agricultural Museum?
Sure. My name's Keith Rucker, and I basically am a volunteer out here at the museum. Actually, I was a student worker here when I was a student at Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College back in the late 80s. Worked out here and just fell in love with the museum, and always been a history buff. Love interpretive history. Love just doing research and learning about that kind of stuff. And when I worked out here, one of the jobs I had was actually working at the steam powered sawmill, and that was really my first introduction to steam engines. And again, it's just something that I just enjoyed doing, so stayed involved with it. So I've been kind of volunteering out here for going on 30 years.
So you say it's your volunteer job? Does your professional career involve steam engines?
No, so I'm a scientist by profession.
Oh, awesome.
I do agricultural research. So I work for Bayer, like the aspirin company, that do on their agriculture side and do again field research work. So it's totally unrelated. I did work after high school before I went to college. I spent a couple years working as a machinist in a machine shop, and that kind of ties into a lot of what I do now, because I help in the maintenance department, do basically keeping all this stuff running out here. So when something breaks on a steam engine, you don't just go down to the steam engine store and buy a part, because they don't exist. So we have to make them. And that's one thing that I spend a lot of time doing is helping keep things running and doing the maintenance and just building whatever needs to be made.
I understand that. Familiar with engines myself. We do a lot of, open up stuff in the garage.
Sure.
But that can lead us into one of our questions, which is kind of, I wanted to get into the basic mechanics of a steam engine and how these things work, because not many people are familiar even with how a steam engine works when they're familiar with the normal combustion engine.
Yeah. So a steam engine is similar to a combustion engine, but yet it has some distinct differences. So there's typically a piston that's going back and forth, which would have in an internal combustion engine. But in an internal combustion engine, the way it works is that piston comes up to the top, it compresses the gasoline and air mixture, and then there's a spark that sparks it, and then an explosion happens, and it pushes the piston back down. And then there's an exhaust stroke, to push the exhaust out.
Yeah.
So basically, if you think about it, for every time that flywheel turns around, you just have a one-cylinder engine. You get one power stroke on every 2 revolutions of the engine. Okay. So with a steam engine, it's a little bit different. Basically, what you're doing, instead of having that fuel exploding in the cylinder, is putting steam into that cylinder. And steam is very interesting in that it's always trying to expand. So inside that boiler is compressed into a tight area, but it's always trying to expand. So when you put it in that cylinder, what it wants to do is it's wanting to expand. And when it expands, it pushes that piston down. But in a steam engine, again, different than an internal combustion engine, it will push the piston in one direction. And when it gets down to the bottom of the stroke, it opens up a valve and it pushes it back the other direction. So for every 1 revolution, you have 2 power strokes going in both directions. So you basically have 4 times the power strokes as compared to like a gasoline engine, because you're basically getting 1 power stroke on 2 revolutions, and 2 revolutions on a steam engine, you're having 4 power strokes because it's going in both directions. And that makes a big difference in they rate engines by horsepower, but it can be deceiving. A steam engine is typically going to have a lot more torque than a regular engine.
Yes.
So a smaller steam engine can usually power something much larger than, you'd have to have a much larger gasoline engine to power something compared to a steam engine.
It's like the gasoline comparison to diesel.
Yeah.
Diesel may not be laying out that much power, but it's got enough torque.
Exactly.
So while we're on the topic of the actual mechanics of the engine, I was watching some shows where they were talking about turbine engines and how those things are very important, and that was a very important discovery in steam engines.
Yeah, so the first steam engine that was really developed was more of a reciprocating type of engine, and over a period of time, things evolved and they came up with the turbine engine. Quite honestly, I don't know as much about the turbine engines because I don't really, that's not something that we do out here at the museum. It's a much more modern invention. But basically the way it works is that instead of having a piston going back and forth, it's more of a rotary thing where the steam is going down through some channels that cause it to turn a shaft. And that's very commonly used in like power plants and stuff now, where coal-fired plants, basically what they're doing is they're creating steam. The steam is then used to drive the turbines, and it's very similar to you can even use water to run a turbine. So it's a little bit different process, but the advantages of the steam turbine is they're much more efficient than a reciprocating engine, which is more what we have out here at the museum.
You had mentioned the first steam engine. Do you know who had invented the first steam engine?
Yeah, so James Watt was the actual first person that had a true steam engine. I guess it was a working steam engine. Now the principle goes back farther than that. I guess looking at the old, teapot on the stove, and I guess the very first one actually was just had some steam coming out of some valves and was just spinning something, but it really wasn't doing anything. It was more of a curiosity. But the first practical working steam engine was invented by James Watt over in England, and it was to solve a problem, which is how most things are invented. You have a problem and you have to come up with a solution to the problem. The problem was they had mines up there, coal mines, that were flooding, and they had water in those coal mines. They needed to pump the water out, and they were limited as how deep they could go into coal mines based on how they could pump. And James Watt actually developed a steam engine to pump water, and it allowed them to make the mines deeper and go deeper and be more productive in the coal mines. And then basically a whole lot of evolution in the design started happening. And this has been I don't remember the exact date that the steam engine, the James Watt engine, I think it was in the early 1800s, if I remember correctly.
That's what I heard.
Yeah, over the next 50, 60 years, obviously there were a lot of improvements made pretty quickly. And
speaking of improvements and names, if I throw George Corliss out there in his system, are you familiar with that?
Yeah, so the Corliss steam engine, I'm a little bit familiar with. I've never really had an opportunity to work around one. That's something. Basically the big difference between the Corliss engine and the engines we use, I think, is in the valve trains and how they're metering the steam into the engine. And Corliss came up with a very efficient valve mechanism. It's a fairly complicated system, but it's extremely efficient. And it really kind of took the engine to the next level as far as efficiency and being able to make the most use out of that steam power.
Yes, that's what I had seen that as a governor system. But as we're moving forward here with the history of steam engines, let's get into the stuff that we were really looking for, is how did they revolutionize America, and more importantly, since we're here at the Georgia Museum of Agriculture, how did they revolutionize Georgia and bring us into the 20th century?
Yeah, so if you go back, pre-steam engine time, when you look at power sources and what was available for power sources, you basically had, and I'm talking up until probably the mid to late 1800s, basically you had two types of power. You either had animal power, so the horse, or you had water power, and water power, of course, being like a water wheel, a grist mill, or something like that. And because of that, industry was fairly constrained to where they could have one of these two types of energy sources, power sources. Animal power really wasn't very efficient for running a factory.
Yeah.
It was all right for plowing a field or moving a cart or something like that. But if you needed to power a factory, pretty much all these factories and stuff were located on rivers, and also where there was some type of fall in the river, so that because you had to have the water level up high, and you needed to have a fall. So before they started building dams, you had to have a natural falls, so that you would have an elevation change in the water. So and if you look even in Georgia, where our earliest cities developed. They developed on rivers, and it was kind of twofold. It was partly because of the water power, but it was also because of transportation. The most efficient way to transport items at that time was on like barges, river boats, on boats rather than over land. It was much more efficient to do that. It didn't require as much energy to move the cargo or something. So our cities kind of developed on wherever there was a river or something like that. So, and that was a major constraint. So what the steam engine allowed is that now suddenly you could have a power source wherever you wanted a power source. You could, anywhere out there, if you needed something, you could go set up a steam engine and you had a power source to run whatever it was that you needed to have running.
Yeah, and particularly with agriculture, the steam engine was able to be powered almost off anything. If you were throwing hay in there as a fuel source, wood, and coal, and it was just so able to be diverse. It was used absolutely everywhere, and especially in the railways. When I had to do some research, I spent a lot of learning about the railways and how it revolutionized America through that. Can you speak a little bit on that? Because I think that's what you're familiar with.
Yeah, well, both stationary and railroad locomotives I'm familiar with, but when you go back to the real early railroads, I'm talking late 1800s. The fuel that powered that railroad was whatever fuel was available in the area. So when you came into the South, most locomotives were not coal powered because we didn't have an abundance of coal like they do, up in New England, or not New England, but up in around Kentucky and New York in that area. So most of our locomotives were wood powered. So you would basically, go out here and cut trees down, throw cords of wood up on the tender on the locomotive, and that would become the power source. Coal kind of became the standard because it was very efficient. It had a lot of energy packed in a small package. And interestingly, when the railroads came into coal country, it really enabled them to be able to start moving coal long distances. And there was kind of a symbiotic relationship between the railroads and the coal companies. In fact, it's interesting that when you look at the conversion from steam locomotives to diesel electric locomotives, which kind of really started in earnest in the 1940s, that conversion really was not completed until probably sometime in the 1960s. Most of it had gone out by the 60s, but there were still a few holdouts running coal. The last railroads that converted from coal to diesel were the railroads that were servicing the coal companies. And because the coal companies was the main thing that they were carrying on the railroad, and of course the coal companies were very much against them moving away from coal. So it's kind of an interesting story there. You go out into like Texas and into the plain states, they had a lot more oil. That was something, they had oil wells out there. So a lot of those locomotives were actually fired with oil. So they would actually have a tank, and it was just burning oil inside the firebox rather than coal. And oil actually had an advantage over coal in that it had more BTUs in it than coal, so you could burn a hotter fire. And even the railroads out in like the Rocky Mountains, where you have to climb these huge mountains, and it requires just creating so much steam so quickly. Even the main railroads up until the end of the steam era, a lot of those locomotives were oil powered instead of coal powered, just because they could get more energy out of the oil than they could out of the coal.
Absolutely. Well, we've been talking about the past today. Steam engines, are they still in use, or are they completely outdated?
So, yeah, they are still in use. Not so much the type of steam engine that we're running out here at the museum, again, the reciprocating steam engine, but again, the steam turbines are still very much in use.
Okay.
They're still in use on, like we said earlier, power plants. Power plants probably being the biggest thing.
And I think I had heard actually that since coal is still our biggest source of electricity, that we use steam turbines to power most of our electricity via coal.
Absolutely.
So therefore,
we're
still using steam turbines for most of our
electricity is produced from steam turbines. And then even in a lot of these ships out at sea have steam turbines in them. kind of moving away from that, but still a lot of them are steam powered in the sense that they're not, it's not a reciprocating steam engine, they're creating a turbine. A lot of times that turbine is actually generating electricity, and the electricity is actually what's propelling the ship. So you still have some of that going.
Plants were still steam, is what.
Yeah, well, actually, yeah, your nuclear power plants, and you have the
Even
nuclear
nuclear
fusion.
submarines.
Yeah, nuclear fusion is creating steam, and then you have a steam turbine that's actually making the electricity. So,
But you know, as we're wrapping this up, we are in 2017 here and moving forward. And since we do agree that the steam engine is being used for most of our energy, pushing forward, do we think the steam engine is going to clean up, or do you think we're going to see it continue to impact the environment, or what are the impacts of these steam engine on the environment? Because I know the old locomotives, you see them pouring out smoke, but I don't know, how do we see the changes going forward? Because I don't know if the steam engine is necessarily going anywhere, because we've been using it for so long and it's so efficient, but how do you see that?
you know, I don't see steam as a power source going away. What I do probably see is how we're creating the steam. I mean, that's where again, you go back to the old steam locomotives belching out the coal and all that. You know, those days are over. Except for maybe someplace running a locomotive just for nostalgia purposes, or displaying it, which I think they do need to be preserved, and we need, as part of our history, we need to see that. And it's not necessarily an absolute terrible thing, but that's the way things were done at one time. We've evolved, things have changed, we've cleaned up the environment, and we don't need to just totally throw it out. But you look at other ways to create steam. Again, nuclear point we just made, geothermal. There's even power plants out there that are taking steam that's just coming out of the ground, and I don't know if you've ever been to the Yellowstone National Park.
Oh yeah, the geysers.
The geysers, and I mean, you go out there and there's just literally steam just coming out of the ground. And if you can tap into that, okay, well now we've got a source of steam. Let's convert that to energy, and a steam engine or a turbine in that case would be a very efficient way of doing it.
Well, that can conclude our